Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
By the late 1950s, rumors inside the ministry suggested that the Molchanov Sector was never meant to function as a standard detention facility. The architectural draft showed only 2 inhabited levels. Yet first-hand accounts from former technicians consistently described elevators that continued descending past the documented foundations, stopping at floors that did not appear on any of the maps stored in the archives. These undocumented levels had an unnerving uniformity: smooth concrete walls with no visible seams, lights without bulbs or wiring, and corridors that curved in a radius too perfect to be Soviet engineering of that era. Guards noted that prisoners selected for transfer to these lower sectors were not political dissidents or hardened criminals, but individuals classified as Group V, people with unusual neurological readings, unexplained resistance to isolation, or anomalous EEG patterns recorded during their interrogations. One technician recalled that before each descent, a low-frequency vibration drifted up the elevator shaft, strong enough to rattle metal instruments, but too faint to be heard directly. Several guards were instructed to never look at the walls during transit to the lower floors. Violation resulted in immediate reassignment or disappearance. When the complex was partially decommissioned in 1975, a set of sealed boxes marked "Do Not Open, Molchanov Interface" was removed under heavy escort. Decades later, a retired engineer privately admitted that the term interface did not refer to machinery but to the prisoners themselves. According to him, the deeper levels were arranged like concentric rings around a central shaft, and from that shaft emanated a kind of hum that synchronized with the prisoners' heart rates, as recorded during nightly monitoring sessions. None of the official closure reports mentioned the shaft, the rings, or the strange resonance, but several surviving logs show identical entries repeated across different departments: stabilization event noted, primary subject unresponsive, transfer to lower ring confirmed. It was as if the facility had been feeding data into something far older and far larger than the bunker itself, something that the staff, despite their rank and clearance, never fully understood. In 1964, a maintenance crew discovered a narrow passage behind a false panel in Sector C, a section supposedly sealed due to chemical contamination. Instead of hazardous waste, the passage led to an angular hallway, lined with matte black plates that absorbed flashlight beams entirely, creating the impression of walking into a void. At the end of the hallway lay a cylindrical chamber, with a metal chair bolted to the floor, facing a wall that appeared to ripple subtly when illuminated. The crew reported this immediately, but instead of receiving commendations, they were detained, interrogated, and reassigned to remote Far East stations within days. Their discovery was quietly reclassified as visual misinterpretation, caused by toxic fumes, although no fumes were detected. Years later, a surviving member of that crew confessed that while inside the chamber he heard a voice, not through his ears but inside his skull, reciting a sequence of numbers in a calm, almost instructional tone. Those numbers, when compared with declassified navigation tables, aligned with coordinates deep under the Ural Mountains. This finding led some historians to propose that the Molchanov Sector was part of a multi-site system, each node serving a distinct purpose: reception, calibration, and transmission. Prisoners who reported echoes, dreams in other languages, or pressure behind the eyes, were moved deeper into the complex until their symptoms stabilized into a predictable pattern. Declassified financial documents from the period reveal strange expenditures: bulk orders of copper coils, medically unnecessary EEG caps, and shipments labeled only as frequency dampeners. Just before the facility ceased operations, a classified emergency memo described an overload incident on the lowest ring, during which all lights went out simultaneously, and seismic sensors registered a sharp impulse emanating from directly beneath the bunker. Though the memo ends abruptly, a handwritten addition in the margin states, the interface activated itself. By 1967, internal reports from the Molchanov Sector described a growing problem among the Group V detainees: synchronized episodes of catatonia occurring at precisely the same second, regardless of which level they were held on. Doctors initially attributed this to environmental stress, but sensor logs recorded identical fluctuations in electromagnetic activity seconds before each episode, suggesting a shared external trigger. To investigate, a high-clearance team installed experimental monitoring arches, large, ring-shaped devices placed directly above the prisoners' beds. These arches emitted a faint blue shimmer when active, though they had no known power source beyond a cable that connected to the central shaft deep below the bunker. After several nights, the devices began reacting on their own, humming at irregular intervals, and at times projecting thin lines of light toward the walls as if scanning for something unseen. Guards stationed near these rooms later reported bouts of nausea, disorientation, and brief memory lapses. One described seeing a silhouette behind the monitoring arch that vanished when he blinked. Despite these incidents, the program accelerated. A classified progress memo noted a breakthrough. Subjects demonstrate improved coherence when exposed to shaft harmonics. Potential alignment nearing threshold. What threshold meant was never explained. In the final months before the sector's closure, technicians witnessed the arches activating simultaneously across multiple levels. The resulting pulse caused dust to fall from the ceiling, metal doors to vibrate, and all recording equipment to fail for exactly 90 seconds. When systems rebooted, 3 detainees were missing from a locked chamber with no signs of forced entry, and no footage showing their escape. Their files were removed the next morning, and the incident was labeled a clerical error. But one internal note, preserved only in a photographed carbon copy, contradicts the official explanation. The interface retrieved additional components. Human containment no longer reliable. When the Molchanov sector was formally decommissioned in 1975, the official story claimed the underground complex had become unsafe due to flooding and subsidence. Yet geological surveys from the same year show no record of soil instability or groundwater displacement. Instead, witness accounts describe a coordinated evacuation that began weeks earlier, during which entire wings were cleared of equipment overnight. One engineer recalled entering the central access corridor on the morning of April the 12th and finding it completely stripped, cables severed, control panels removed, and the elevator to the lower rings welded shut. Still, the low-frequency hum for which the complex was infamous persisted through the metal, faint but unmistakable. Several staff members insisted that the vibration was stronger than they had ever felt, as if whatever lay beneath the rings was becoming more active as the human presence withdrew. On the final day of operation, armed units sealed every entrance with reinforced plates. However, a small group of technicians, tasked with winding down the electrical systems, claimed that the main power conduit, intended to energize the lower levels, continued drawing current even after being physically disconnected. The instruments measuring load were not malfunctioning, the current simply had somewhere else to go. After the facility was sealed, multiple guards, stationed on the surface reported hearing metallic knocks echoing through the ground at night, spaced in sequences of 3 or 5. An internal memo warned personnel to ignore the sounds and discourage further reporting. Decades later, after parts of the archives were declassified, researchers discovered a final, never-published document from the Leadership Committee, Deactivation incomplete. Residual processes remain beyond accessible depth. Further interference not recommended. The document ends with a single handwritten line: if the interface was only dormant, the sector may have served as a buffer, not a cage. Throughout the late 1980s, several independent seismic teams working near the outskirts of Moscow recorded a repeating subterranean signal that defied conventional geological explanation. The pulses were narrow, evenly spaced, and originated from a depth far greater than the known limits of the Molchanov sector's construction. Attempts to triangulate the source placed it directly beneath the sealed bunker, at an approximate depth of 700 meters, far below the deepest documented level. The frequency of the pulses matched archived sensor data from the bunker's monitoring network before its closure, leading some analysts to suspect that the so-called lower rings were not the actual bottom of the facility, but merely the accessible portion of something larger. In 1991, during the political upheavals of the time, a retired technician anonymously submitted a dossier to a local newspaper, containing sketches of an enormous shaft, far wider than the diagrams in official plans. He claimed he had once lowered a diagnostic probe into the shaft, which continued descending for nearly 6 minutes before the cable snapped. The probe's final transmission included a single audio sample, a slow, rhythmic oscillation resembling breath filtered through metal. The newspaper never published the dossier, and the technician disappeared 3 months later. Only photocopies of his sketches survive among private collectors. Block 6. When the archives partially opened in 2003, researchers gained brief access to a set of mislabeled microfilms believed to relate to the Molchanov sector. One roll contained footage of a corridor with smooth, metallic walls, unlike the reinforced concrete typical of Soviet underground facilities. The camera operator walked for several minutes without reaching an endpoint, yet the timestamp indicated no cuts or gaps. Near the end of the reel, the walls began to ripple subtly, as if vibrating not from an external force, but from something within the material itself. Infrastructure experts later noted that nothing like this existed in Soviet engineering catalogs, The walls resembled advanced alloys used in classified aerospace prototypes decades later. Another microfilm contained interviews with staff members from the Psychological Assessment Division. They described detainees becoming unusually calm during shaft resonance events, even when the events caused lights to flicker and metal supports to groan. One psychologist stated, "They acted like the sound was familiar, like they were listening to instructions." The final minutes of the interview were redacted, and the microfilm was withdrawn from the archive shortly thereafter. In 2017, an urban exploration group managed to breach a forgotten maintenance tunnel thought to lead only to a ventilation shaft. Instead, they found themselves in a sloping passage that descended far deeper than expected, lined with deactivated sensors fused into the walls. Their handheld cameras recorded a distant hum that grew louder as they progressed, but before they could reach the end of the tunnel, the passage abruptly terminated in a smooth, seamless barrier with no bolts, seams, or visible material transitions. When one of them touched it, the hum ceased instantly, plunging the entire tunnel into an unnatural silence that the group later described as heavy, like pressure pushing inward. Moments later, their equipment malfunctioned simultaneously, lights dimming, batteries draining, audio distorting. They fled, and when authorities arrived hours later, the tunnel was completely collapsed as if crushed from both above and below. No official statement was issued, but leaked internal notes from emergency geologists suggested the collapse pattern was inconsistent with natural subsidence. Instead, it was consistent with rapid structural contraction, originating from a non-surface vector. By 2020, a classified engineering audit leaked online, containing fragments of a structural analysis labeled Molchanov Sublevel Integrity Survey. Although heavily redacted, several diagrams showed a branching system of tunnels, extending far beyond the known footprint, some angled downward in impossible gradients, others looping back into themselves, in a way that defied architectural logic. The report mentioned recurrent magnetic fluctuations along these undocumented routes, and referenced peripheral echo zones, areas where instruments displayed delayed readings, as if the environment responded seconds after being measured. One page contained a brief note from an anonymous reviewer: "The lower structure is not responding to stress, it is anticipating it." This single sentence triggered a wave of speculation that the bunker was either constructed around something pre-existing or retrofitted onto a deeper installation of unknown origin. A digital metadata analysis of the leaked files revealed they had been edited, using software unavailable to civilian agencies, and timestamps indicated rapid modification cycles, suggesting multiple attempts to sanitize the content. Despite this, one image escaped deletion, a grainy still of what looked like an enormous circular chamber, whose walls curved in a perfect arc, smooth like cast metal but embedded with faint symbols arranged in spiraling sequences. Linguistic experts identified no known alphabet, though several markings resembled recurring patterns found in Cold War-era sensory deprivation studies, where test subjects reportedly sketched similar shapes after long isolation. The implication was disturbing: either the bunker architects deliberately incorporated these patterns, or someone in the facility reproduced symbols seen or heard from an unknown source deep below. In response to the leak, security teams swept the suspected archive servers, deleting over a terabyte of internal research logs. But the purge came too late. Copies circulated through underground forums, where users noted a final, overlooked detail in the audit: the footer, Cycle 14 pending. No public documents ever mentioned cycles within the Molchanov sector, raising the question: how many had already been completed before anyone knew they existed? In early 2022, construction crews working on a commercial pipeline near the former restricted zone reported drilling equipment repeatedly malfunctioning at a precise depth of 62 meters. The failures occurred even when rigs were relocated hundreds of meters apart, always stalling with identical readings, sudden drops in resistance followed by rapid overheating, as though the drill bit had touched something dense yet energy responsive. When georadar teams surveyed the area, they discovered a hemispherical object buried beneath layers of compact soil, appearing neither metallic nor geological. The anomaly absorbed radar pulses without reflection, creating a void-like silhouette with a faint internal glow captured only in infrared. Before the research could continue, military representatives arrived, sealing off the site under a temporary emergency directive. Workers were ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements. One later admitted he saw the hemisphere vibrate faintly, like something inside was shifting to a different rhythm. The incident sparked renewed interest among former Molchanov staff, including a retired geophysicist who anonymously uploaded a hand-drawn map overlaying the drill coordinates with the original bunker layout. The hemisphere aligned perfectly with an undocumented vertical corridor, leading toward the rumored depth sectors, levels said to be accessible only to a black cadre of personnel whose names never appeared on rosters. Internal chatter suggested the buried object might be a sealed access node, similar to the seamless barriers encountered by explorers years earlier. Satellite images taken days before the military cordon showed subtle heat signatures spreading outward in thin lattices, as if the ground itself were warming along predetermined lines. Experts speculated the geometry resembled conduction grids used in controlled resonance experiments, possibly meaning the object below was transmitting, receiving, or calibrating for something not yet active on the surface. By late 2023, whistleblowers from a defunct systems monitoring contractor leaked what they called the Molchanov pulse recordings, a 12-minute audio file captured by subterranean sensors years after the facility's closure. The recording began with faint mechanical hums, consistent with deep-level air circulation, but gradually shifted into a layered oscillation containing harmonics not typical of machinery. Spectrographic analysis revealed repeating sequences spaced in ratios used in early communication encoding, suggesting intentional structure rather than random vibration. At the 7-minute mark, the signal abruptly intensified, producing a tremor detected by independent seismographs across the region. The waveform displayed a rising pattern resembling a countdown or synchronization cycle. Among the files was a decrypted memo, referencing an event called Alignment Window 3, describing it as a planned coherence test with the lower interface assembly. No known documents explain what the interface was or why it required alignment with external timing markers. The memo ended with an alarming statement: the entity reacts predictively. We must not exceed threshold B. Analysts debated whether entity referred to a machine, a biological system, or something entirely different, housed in the lower sectors. 3 days after the leak, every mirror of the audio file vanished from the internet, replaced with takedown notices citing hazardous misinformation protocols. But archived logs from automated monitoring stations recorded a real event. On the same night the audio leaked, sensors around the old restricted zone detected a synchronized drop in electromagnetic noise, as if the underground structure briefly ceased all activity, followed by a single, powerful pulse expanding outward in a perfect radio pattern. The pulse was too uniform to be natural. It was more like a response. And if the Molchanov sector was reacting, the question remaining is, reacting to what?
Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.